Welcome to the Longmont Observer. I'm Scott Converse, the publisher of the Longmont Observer. And today we have with us Sergeant Craig Mortensen, who is the sergeant in charge of the SRO program, correct?
Yes, correct.
Yep. And Mike Butler, the Chief of Public Service here today. So, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the School Resource Officer program in the Longmont school system. So, as many of you know, we have had some questions about the violence in schools over the last years, and particularly the last few months. And there's a lot of activity happening in the schools right now. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to see what the local police force is doing, and we'll also be talking to the school district and see how this all works together. So why don't you kind of give us an overview of the SRO program and where you're at?
Well, first of all, we've had our School Resource Officer program for about 20 years. Right now we have 6 school resource officers, 1 per high school, and then 1 per 2 middle schools, or 6 middle schools in Longmont, and so we have 1 school resource officer that bounces back and forth between 2 middle schools. The program is generally designed to keep a sense of safety within the schools with the presence of a full police officer, that has all the powers of a police officer in the state of Colorado within the school itself. This has been an ongoing partnership with the St. Valley School District for this entire time. Financially, they pay for 50% of the school resource officer for 9 months, and then the city of Longmont pays the rest. And so that program has been going on, like I said, for 20 years. I want to let Sergeant Craig Mortensen talk a little bit about what our school resource officers do every day and what we're intending to do. But the other part of this is we know that there's concerns around safety in our schools all over this country, and certainly our school district and our city. We've gotten a number of concerns expressed to us. I know that the school district has received similar concerns as well. And what I'd like to say is that the partnership we have with the St. Valley School District is really strong. And I can assure everyone that the safety of kids in our schools is a top priority, not only for the St. Valley School District, but for us as well. And we may or may not talk about this, but the school district has done, they've done a lot to harden the target, if you will, of each facility where there's kids. And we may talk about the security, what that security looks like, but every building is locked. There's cameras, and the security measures that the school district has put in place, the technology, the engineering, school measures have been considerable in terms of safety. And so along with school resource officers, and I think there's somebody that oversees the security of the schools as well.
Yes.
There has been quite a bit of conversation and a lot of strategies put in place over the years to keep our kids as safe as possible in our schools. And so just wanted to start off with that, Scott, and I'll let Sergeant Mortensen talk a little bit about what happens in the schools day to day from the school resource officer's perspective.
All right.
Sure. So like Chief Butler said, our group has 6 SROs, and then I'm their supervisor. And within those six SROs, it's a full-time position. If school is in session, they're in the schools, as from the time the doors open in the morning until the time the doors close in the afternoon. And then you'll see school resource officers at extracurricular activities, athletic events, and we've recently had them at plays and musical events in the evenings. So the school resource officers, they're there for several reasons. Number one is obviously for the safety of the school. They provide physical safety, and they give people a sense of calm, and that goes with administrators as well as teachers as well as students. A big part of what they do and how they do that is how they develop the relationships within their schools with administrators, teachers, and students. And we look very closely, and we really push that as far as who we take as an SRO and who we put into those schools. We need people that can really build relationships with all different types of people. and in all walks of life, whether they're students, whether they're adults, they're supervisors. Their job is to build those relationships in those schools.
I also want to throw in parents in that mix.
And parents, yeah.
Parents in that mix.
Really, they're a de facto part of the administration of those schools, and that's how a lot of people look at them, because they work so closely with those schools. Now, the school district does pay 9 months of their salary, or half of 9 months of their salary, but they do report to the police department. They are not employees of the school district. But having said that, we ask them, and they do a great job of enmeshing themselves so deep into the fabric of those schools. They really know the ins and outs of everything that's going on in the schools. So that's a great thing, and I think a lot of people look at them and they learn to trust the SRO, and the SRO can solve a lot of problems, whether they're criminal or other types of problems that we see in schools. So.
The one thing I want to add to what I think Sergeant Mortensen what said so well is those relationships are important, and we want school resource officers that have this kind of aura of they're approachable, they're friendly, they create a place that's safe for kids to approach them. Oftentimes we hear from lots of kids about personal issues, about what they're struggling with, about what they're struggling with their friends, about what they heard about within the schools. You might even want to call it intelligence at some level in terms of what might be happening, what might not be happening. I mean, in our minds, that is probably one of the most effective ways to keep our schools safe is through these relationships, and so that our SROs really become kind of the point person, the convergence point for a lot of kids, for a lot of teachers, for a lot of administrators to go to and say, hey, this is what I heard, or this is what might be going down, or this is a problem I have, or can you help me with this? And so our school resource officers are really good at being those kinds of folks where people feel safe in approaching.
I think if you ask them, they would say, we do as much coaching, mentoring, counseling as we do law enforcement type of things. Probably more so on those first three, and the law enforcement piece does come in, but they spend more time doing those things. Our SROs are teachers in schools, and so they help provide lesson plans, and they'll help teachers teach certain parts of classes that have an application to safety and that well-being. So they wear a lot of hats. Our SROs do.
So tell me a little bit about what's the difference between the training an SRO gets and, say, a regular police officer.
So, like Chief Butler said, we are regular police officers. They're sworn law enforcement.
So it's interchangeable?
When we bring this SRO in, we have an expectation that they'll stay in the SRO program for a minimum of 5 years. But after that, they can go back to patrol or other things that interest them, and new people can come in. So in that sense, there's really no distinction between, in our agency, our SROs are police officers. Now, there's specialized training that comes into that. We send our prospective SROs to national schools specific to how to police in schools. And it talks more, not just about policing, but again, that mentoring aspect. We have a lot of students that will come to our school resource officers and they'll say, hey, I'm struggling with this problem, or I'm struggling at home. And like I said, they have to be a lot of times just general counselors because the relationships that they build, and people feel safe in coming and talking to them about that. So they get training at these schools and in other areas. They get training for, being counselors. They get training for being, mentors, that type of thing. And so, in addition to that, they really focus on juvenile law because a lot of times that's what we're dealing with in the schools. And so, they kind of, as a de facto, the department can look at them as a resource for juvenile law because in places it's very different than, law aspects for adults.
Talk a little bit about that. What is the difference between standard law, adult law, over 18 law, and when you're under 18?
Well, a lot of that comes into play when we talk about relationships with families and with parents, right? Parents, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, we want to involve them at the very front end of anything that we're doing, especially if it's, law enforcement driven. So we want to involve them in that partnership. Gone are the days where we just say, hey, this guy did a bad thing, okay, let's put him in the court system and on to our next problem, right? We really take a hard look at what's going to be best for this student or the student and his family, and how can we get them hooked up with those resources in order to really make a difference in the life of the student. We really want the well-being of the student to be our priority. And in some cases, that does mean going through the criminal justice process. But in so many more cases, there are other things out there where we're going to at least try. Let's try this step. Let's try that step. Let's get you hooked up with, family counseling. And we can help provide those resources along with the school district. The school district has a lot of those resources in place as well. So we kind of work together that way. But really it's about, in adult law, you are an adult. You're responsible for your actions. In juvenile law, we really try to engage the family and the parents, not only to find out what's going on, but to find an effective solution.
So, kind of related to that, what would you say the percentage of actual crime is going on in the schools versus kids being kids?
Well, we'll always have kids being kids,
yeah.
Right? And some people look at that differently. If you look at, crime does occur in schools, right? I think that it's something that's not, you kind of have to look at it and say, what type of crime is? Are we talking serious crime? Are we talking, quality of life issue type, things like that? Because it's hard to put a label on somebody and say, hey, you did this. You're drinking alcohol. You're now a criminal, right? Yes, it's a crime for a juvenile to have alcohol or to be intoxicated, but so you kind of look at what level are we talking about here? If you're talking about serious crime, I think if you compare it to, workplace or anything like that, you're going to find it to be lower. That's just my initial impression on that. But
yeah, and I want to follow up on that. Sometimes we'll see theft. Sometimes we'll see minor assaults with fights. Sometimes we'll see some harassment cases. Occasionally we'll see a use of narcotics, but those are relatively minor in the scheme of things when you consider the continuum of what crime can look like.
Right.
The other thing I want to make real clear is that some people still think we have a potential gang issue in our community, and that some of that is within the schools. And we can sit here and emphatically say that the gang issue in our community is almost zero, and that is also true for our schools. But we also have, our school resource officers are also watching out for those things and working with the kids that may want to have, they're predisposed to thinking that they might want to be a gang member. So we work with them, we work with their families, we work with the teachers in the schools, and we really prevent a lot of things. And over the years, Scott, what I can't sit here, one of the questions that, well, what have you prevented? I can speak anecdotally about so many different incidents that have occurred that didn't occur over the years as a result of our school resource officer program, and basically students coming to our school resource officers and saying, here's what I know, here's what I've heard. And so that's a big role that we play within the schools is prevention. And so that's a very, very valuable thing that doesn't show up on any statistic or any kind of ledger or an Excel sheet or anything like that. But the SROs can, if they were here, they could sit here and tell you story after story after story about what they've prevented. So,
excellent. So do all schools have SROs? And if not, how do you decide?
No, not all the schools. And our SRO program just covers the St. Vrain Valley in Longmont. We don't cover fully the district because, we have, the district has schools in Boulder County
right.
and in Firestone, Frederick, Erie. We don't cover those schools as far as our department. Ours are just the schools in Longmont. In Longmont, we have a full-time SRO in each high school. So that's Silver Creek, Skyline, and Longmont High School. All those schools that are high schools that are in this city limits. Additionally, like Chief Butler said, we have 3 SROs that are assigned to the 6 middle schools in the city. And so we have one SRO assigned to Sunset Middle School and Altona Middle School. We have one SRO assigned to Westview and Longs Peak. And we have another SRO that's assigned to Trail Ridge and Timberline, K through 8 school. So we have 6 SROs. We've put them in the secondary schools because honestly, that's where we find the biggest need for them. And it's not just, we're not just talking, crimes committed or offenses. We're talking about, these are where kids are starting to grow up and they're starting to struggle with, life and pressures and things like that. And there's a mental health aspect, and there is, these kids feel a lot of pressure and they need to vent sometimes. And for some kids, home's not the place that they feel they can do that, but they can do it at school, which is again why it's such a big piece for our SROs to develop relationships with these kids. They can be an outlet for a lot of these kids.
It gets into that kind of a famous quote that it takes a village to raise a child. And school is part of the village, and the SRO is part of the school. And they work with families, they work with parents, they work with their friends, the teachers, and so we're just part of the village at some level in terms of raising a child in our city. And our school resource officers are just, they're happy to be a part of that. So.
Sounds like some of it is almost preventative. You're catching a lot of this stuff.
A huge piece is, we want to be preventative.
Talk
right?
about mental health a little bit, how that fits in here.
We see an uptick throughout society, in mental health issues. And the schools aren't a lot different that way. We want to provide any and all assistance that we can to these students. Again, we want them to be well balanced, learned when they come out of these schools, and we want to be a big part of that. We have the opportunity to, when we can find things out or when people come and talk to us, to say, hey, let's try this intervention method. Maybe it's just they need somebody to talk to and they feel better. Maybe it's something greater than that. But between the school district and the police department, with the resources that we can line up, we can look at covering a lot of those issues, at least start getting them into the system where they need to be to get the help that they need. And if we don't do that, then we kind of leave these kids to their own devices. And who knows where they can end up that way. So that's a big part of the prevention piece too. Let's recognize what the real issues are rather than the manifestations, and try to help those. And if we can do that, I think by and large we're going to be successful in keeping a lot of kids in school, graduating, and allow them to go and do what they want to do once they're done with their high school years.
So how do you integrate with teachers? How does that work?
Our SROs are considered part of the faculty, part of the staff. They attend the meetings. They do some, training for the teachers, specifically related to safety issues and things to look for. Chief Butler talked a little bit about, we'll teach and show our teachers, hey, what to look for if a child's struggling, or maybe what to look for if they have, they've idealized maybe a gang lifestyle or something. These are things that you can look for, and we can find those early and provide, means to say, hey, let's correct course here. Let's get you back on the right course, rather than these courses that really ultimately aren't going to take you in places you want to be in a few years. But they're teachers too, our SROs, and so they're part of the staff. And we have staff members that come to our SROs to discuss personal problems or problems with students, or hey, how do you guys look at this? And they're just one of the staff, really. Right. So,
is there like a formal document that you guys have with the St. Mary Valley School District, like a memo of understanding?
There's a memo of understanding and agreements and contracts that we've been working from for years, and every now and then it needs to be tweaked or refined, but we're always on top of what that needs to look like, and yes, there is.
And I think that comes from both sides. I work very closely with my security counterpoint counterpart at St. Vrain Valley School District, Stacy. She and I were in constant contact, and when they see things and say, hey, maybe we need to modify or change this, or when we see things, she and I have a very open, direct line of communication where we can, let's start this process and get it done quickly. In those occasions where things do need to be modified or tweaked or updated.
So some of the things we've been seeing, for instance, since Florida, the students have become very active. And there's some questions sometimes about resolving conflicts between student safety and students' rights. How do you guys deal with that? Things like search and seizure, questioning of students, free speech rights, things like that. How do you deal with that?
Well, first and foremost, we follow the law. What the law tells us we can and can't do, that's what we can and can't do. We try to get, again, it goes back to those relationships. We try to get buy-in for them, especially from the students and their families, right? This is, I can't think of the word here, but this is an effort that is not just, school safety is not just law enforcement, right? Everybody has a part to play in this, and we try to play our part and help others understand what their part is, and that includes the students. The students exercising their rights, that's great. We want to see them exercising their rights. We want to see them be responsible citizens, but we also want to see them safe. And so we try to get the students to have their buy-in. Say, not unlocking doors or holding doors open for people, not propping doors open, talking to somebody, whether it's a teacher, an administrator, a parent, the SRO, if they hear or see something, reporting those things. And so it's a big picture view we're trying to take. We do have a program that's statewide, is the Safe to Tell program, and it's an anonymous way for students or teachers or parents to report things that they hear, they see, they notice that concerns them. And so those get sent to the Safe to Tell system, and the Safe to Tell system says this is specific to this school or this school district, and they'll send it to that school and school district. SROs are included in that. If there's a problem that comes through Safe to Tell that's specific to their schools, SROs will also get that, so that kind of gets out in a timely manner. And then the school resource officer, along with the administration and staff, they can say, okay, how do we want to approach this problem? Is this what we're seeing? Or is there another explanation for this? Because a lot of times people hear things and they're like, I just want someone to know. I'm not sure if it's true or not, I just want somebody to know. And we're appreciative of that. So we work closely together with them. But again, it takes everybody. If we truly want to make a school environment safe, it takes everybody buying into that. It can't just be a one-sided, law enforcement is responsible for that and we don't have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
It comes to everybody.
I've had the opportunity to speak to several classes lately, and actually I was invited to do a keynote with about 100 students on Building Democracy Day at the city. And I knew the issue was right after the Parkland, Florida school shooting, and one of the issues that they were going to discuss and wanted to talk about with me in the classroom was school safety. And I know that there's been a lot of media around how to do things in terms of whether it's more armament, arming teachers, or whether we do something different along the way of arming people. But I wanted to say this, and this is what I told the students. If you want your school to be safe, if you know somebody in your school, and I asked the kids in every environment I was in, how many of you know somebody that eats lunch by themselves, that seems to be friendless, that maybe even seems a little bit on the odd part, whatever that might look like? Every single one of them raised their hand and said, we all know somebody like that. And I said, well, how do we treat those folks? And I actually, this is part of the message that we send to the entire community as well. It's not just schools. Schools are many communities. And so I really strongly recommended to them that they reach out to those kids that seem to be marginalized or disenfranchised or ostracized in some way, and let them know that they count. Let them know that they're appreciated and valued, and let them know that they're part of all of us. And that way that person who might feel marginalized may have a better chance at feeling like they belong. And maybe they realize that their voice counts or their thoughts matter, maybe more importantly that their humanness is valued. Because when we see a lot of these school shootings across the country, it's not unusual for us to find people that have had some history in schools where they have been marginalized or disenfranchised for whatever reason. And what I found very satisfying and rewarding to hear back is, and I actually talked to a bunch of middle school students about this too, was how willing they were to do that, and how actually that seemed like a really good idea, and they were kind of rallying themselves around this. So I just wouldn't say this to the schools. I'd say it to anybody in our community. We need an entire community to embrace folks who are struggling with mental health or addiction, and we won't go down that path now, but that's a strong message that we're only going to heal as a community. Sometimes schools can be more safe if we treat each other that way. And that resonated with the kids, and it was a big deal for them.
Right. So I kind of hit on everything I wanted to. Are there some things that other approaches that we should be taking or that we should be considering you want to talk about?
One thing I want to talk about is in the high schools, we now have we've had for many, many years a student police academy, in which every day out of a semester, a police officer comes into the school outside of the school resource officer and talks to a classroom full of kids that have signed up for an elective course called the Student Police Academy. And oftentimes there are students waiting in line to get into these courses. And so we go over a lot of what goes on for police, the criminal justice system, the role they can play. We talk about careers in the criminal justice system. Part of that also gets to forming better relationships between police officers and students. And so we talk about the weaknesses and failures of our criminal justice system, what it can do, what it can't do. We talk about career opportunities. We encourage people. There's a number of kids that are already interested in being a police officer. And then we really do enhance our relationships. I mean, there's a natural rub between students of that age and authority, especially police officers. And so we understand that natural rub exists, and we want to do our best to try to figure out how to keep that rub from getting any bigger and to transcend whatever tension there might be. And so we answer every one of their questions. They challenge us. They actually do ride-alongs. They actually perform certain things and think we do as police officers, so that they have a better understanding of what we're doing. But in return, we have police officers that have a better relationship with a lot of our students. And so that has been a long-standing, very popular program within our schools. I'd say at least 15, maybe closer to 20 years in terms of so thousands of students have been through that. And we have had people who have become police officers out of those classes. But it's a way of cultivating possible future police officers right from our own community, and we see that as an opportunity.
Even if we don't get police officers out of that, these kids come away with a sense of, how the legal system works, how law works, use of all those types of things, use of force, search and seizure. They come away with a better understanding of how things, are written, how things work. And so when they see things on television or hear stories or this or that, they can actually apply what they've learned and say, oh, I know that the law says this when we're talking about this. And so we've seen, a lot of kids have been like, wow, I never knew that. And that makes sense based on everything I'm hearing because of what I learned. Some of these kids, with parental consent, we even involve in some of our trainings. And they get to see firsthand, some of the things when we put our police officers through training, they get to see firsthand the issues and the things that they get to see it from a police perspective, and I think that's eye-opening and beneficial to a lot of them. So.
Without question, and I don't think the community is generally aware either that we often use students from our local high schools on our interview panels to select police officers. And they have been impressive and amazing and insightful and wise and actually very valuable to these selection processes. And frankly, we think that's a great idea to have people who are served by our community, especially youth, to say, hey, they get a voice in saying who their future police officers are going to be in this community. So some of those, the SROs help us identify who those students could be, and they sit on our panels to select police officers.
And they sit on our panels to select SROs. Who do they want to see in the schools?
There you go.
So,
All right, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today.
You're welcome.
This is Sergeant Craig Mortensen and and Chief Mike Butler. I'm Scott Converse, publisher of the Longmont Observer. Thanks for listening and or watching.